there, correct?
Yes, I'm very excited.
That'll be
It's
cool.
going to be a good day at the Capitol.
Weather's going to be good for that. And
Yes.
it may get a little rainy tonight and tomorrow. But for the important event today, it'll be there. And I think the event starts, as early as 7:30, right? Doors open or whatever.
Yeah, and there'll be lots of tables and groups down there. I think, I would get there early. But, I think it's 8-ish is when I plan to get there. So I will be ducking out a little bit early this morning. But it'll be a great day. And then the march occurs then after the rally. So excited for all of my friends to be in Jefferson City today.
It'll be fun.
Well, Steph, we get hate mail when you're not here.
Yeah, we got hate mail.
We can't live up to the excellence that you are when you're here.
True.
So,
And I hope you saw my tweet yesterday, because I know it's not ideal when one of us has to step out, but right now it's as most of you know, and I get this question a lot: are you still practicing law? And I said, yeah, all day long, sometimes into the night. And so it is election year, which means for my business is very busy. These cases are crazy. You can Google me and find me in many of the stuff that's going on right now, which we won't talk a whole lot about. But certainly, I agree in one way, and that's what I tweeted yesterday, is that we like it when the whole gang is here. And certainly it's more fun for us. So we're trying to do that every day. But certainly there are times when work and my public service and other things call. And so we're doing the best we can.
and some folks like to assume that you're just on vacation all the time. Not
Right.
the case.
No, not
the case.
No.
And John, will you be heading over to either the Midwest March for Life or by Missouri? Because that event is going concurrently around the Capitol.
Yeah, it's a big one, especially the march at the Capitol. We expect thousands of people here from all across the state.
And that thread is woven into what's been going on the Senate floor, right? In terms of the dominoes that certain people want their domino to fall first before other people get their dominoes to fall. And it's basically a chaotic mess.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
John.
about the FRA, isn't it? And
Well-
we're not supposed to use abbreviations.
Yes. Randy, you want to explain to us what the FRA is? You're the
FRA is
medical
just a way
professional.
of taxing hospitals, self-tax. It's administered by the Missouri Hospital Association. That self-tax then is used to hold up to the federal government and say, look at all this money that we need you to match. And then they match $4 billion in this case. And then that goes in to then help care for the expanded Medicaid pools.
Well, and John, I thought the deal was we want that standalone Planned Parenthood ban that passed last week before we do the FRA. And that was, we're not going to pass the FRA till we get the standalone Planned Parenthood ban. They got the standalone ban last week, and now they're like, actually, on the FRA, we need our IP reform bill signed by the governor.
Well, the Missouri Freedom Caucus said that they want that FRA signed by the governor.
Before they move ahead.
Then they want the IP reform bill, and then they'll go into.
Like our governor isn't going to sign pro-life legislation. I mean, what is going on?
I think we have trust issues. Apparently, that's what it is.
And ultimately, I mean, what's the point here? I guess they've been holding the floor since yesterday morning, and obviously we are on a really tight timeline on the budget. The House has been threatening the Senate, saying, don't you dare send that budget back over here with not enough time for us to conference on it. So they have limited time. The clock is ticking, and now we're spending time on this, which, I thought there was already kind of a deal on, like I said. Here's my concern, I guess, is that, federally, we've seen some of the conservatives have had to work with the Democrats in certain circumstances. And here, if I'm a senator and I'm not on either side, and I know that the time is ticking on the budget, we have I took an oath. We have a constitutional duty to pass the budget in 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
And I want to get things done. My only choice then, I think, would be to try to PQ this. Without the Freedom Caucus, I don't have the votes to call the previous question.
Well, PQ is not DQ. So what is PQ?
The nuclear option, they like to refer to it as.
To cut off debate and to move on.
It's the previous question.
The previous question. And so in order to get the votes for the previous question here, I don't have those votes, I don't think, without the Freedom Caucus. So I would need the Democrats to join with me to end this debate. Right? So if I'm Lincoln Huff and I have to go, or Cindy O'Loughlin or whatever, and I have to go over and talk to J.J. Rizzo, who's the Democrat leader, and say, we're going to end this debate, we need a PQ, whatever, right?
It is a bit perplexing, though, in that, the Freedom Caucus is saying, why don't you put the IP reform up for a vote? Because
it already Well, the IP reform came back from the House. Yeah, but it's already been voted on once in the Senate.
Right, but they need to do something more, right? And they're holding their cards and doing a filibuster.
Well, last week we did Bill Eigel's gold bill, right? We were doing other things they wanted. I mean, seriously.
Well, and pretty early in the evening last night, but if you're not following Scott Fawn on Twitter, you need to be, because when these filibusters happen, he always does a really entertaining...
He gets a little salty.
Like a play-by-play almost of what's happening.
More than usual.
And so I saw that he had tweeted that Senator Denny Hoskins and Bill Eigel were saying on the Senate floor that they had worked out a sleep schedule.
Oh.
So that they were prepared to hold the floor as long as they needed to get IP reform done.
And I know we're getting a little bit in the weeds.
It's very confusing to people. It's confusing to me. I'm not an idiot, but I can't. It's hard to figure this out. I don't understand. If there's three bills, right? The FRA's passed. No, the protection of abortion.
Yeah.
That's Planned Parenthood. We're not going to fund Planned. That's passed. The governor hasn't signed it.
Right.
The IP reform hasn't passed in the Senate, but it's passed in the House.
No, it passed in the Senate. It went to the House. The House changed it. It's back, basically.
For a little adjustment to see. Okay. And they're saying, but the budget is still hanging out there, and the Freedom Caucus is leveraging their need to get the IP reform done, signed, sealed, and delivered before they're going to go any further on FRA and then the budget. Is that it? That's what's happening.
I don't think it matters what the issue is before the body. I think they are standing up for the cameras and for campaign purposes. But
wait a minute.
Hot take.
But anyway, hold on. But let's get back. I mean, my real concern, and I do think we should get onto the budget, but my real concern is if they actually need the PQ and they have to go to the Democrats to get the PQ, if I'm the Democrats, I'm not giving you my votes for a PQ for free.
Not after you kept me up all night.
Yeah, so now we're going to have to make concessions to the Democrats to get them to vote for the PQ, concessions that we would have never had to make had we not had the temper tantrum.
Okay,
and that's very un-Freedom Caucus of
But I think
them,
from the average person looking at this, I'm reading from the Freedom Caucus's release, April 30th. It makes perfect sense.
Don't read everything you don't believe everything.
Well, it's either true or it's false. Senate and House leadership have tried and failed to pass IP reform for many years. Passage of SJR 74, which is, right, the IP reform, and HB 2634, what the heck is that? Becoming law are both imminent and necessary priorities which clearly supersede consideration of the FRA. I mean, you're in the pro-life movement. This IP reform is critical to this, because if IP reform passes, potentially this whole constitutional amendment proposal would be gone. Not a big deal. So it's an important deal. All right. Doesn't that make sense?
They say that they failed to pass it for the 7 years. These are people who are sitting there and why didn't they filibuster it last year? I mean, they're sitting members. Isn't it partially their fault?
You know, one thing too that is it's very interesting. I think it gets confusing because both chambers passed it. Stephanie's right, and it is confusing to try to explain. They did pass it, but there's different versions. The Speaker of the House right now, the Speaker of the House, Dean Plocher, has written a letter to Cindy O'Loughlin. Yeah. And essentially he is calling for her, it wasn't a critical letter, basically saying, get this done, get the IP refund done first, and then we'll do the clean FRA, he says, and then on to the budget. He has the budget is third, but he wants that done first. Essentially what Hoskins and Eigel are saying is do this now. But if you look at the handwritten notes, and Denny Hoskins got handwritten
and the vote
notes.
tally.
Vote tally's very telling. It's a split vote. Some Democrats, it's 23-7. But basically O'Loughlin's saying, let's lay this over until the last day of session.
Is that because she's prioritizing the FRA and the budget? And these are economic issues, and then we'll deal with this other issue.
You know, it could be that. We'd have to have her on for sure. That could be. But the risk of doing it on the very last day is the Democrats could shut the chamber down. I mean, it's just either way, the chamber will be shut down on the final day. Are you saying that the
Freedom Caucus has a point?
They could.
We keep talking about it. Look, I'm going to say it again. Cindy O'Loughlin's a great friend of mine. I worked with her I like Cindy O'Loughlin. I like Caleb Rowden, great man of Christ. Lincoln Hoff seems to be a decent guy. I've only met him a couple times. What in the heck gives? Get the IP reform done, people. I don't understand it.
Well, again, Stephanie,
I don't understand it.
It's just, and you've got you've
Not
got a lot
all
of
conservatives support IP reform.
and then if you do that, they could shut the chamber down. Now, it's just there's a lot of
Special session looms large.
Well, if the FRA doesn't get, and Bill Eigels made it clear he's going to filibuster FRA until he gets the IP reform.
There's something missing here. We got to get Cindy O'Loughlin or Caleb Rowden's take on this, because to the average guy out there, I'm sorry, you look at this and you say, wait a minute, I know these people. They're not holding this. They're not holding this back for without a good reason. There's something else going on here. Is it because they don't trust that if they were to pass this, that then there wouldn't be a big brouhaha at FRA? Because now what are we doing? We're expanding Medicaid and funding that. Is that the problem? Does Eigel have a real problem in the FRA?
No,
is that the problem?
On IP reform, it's very easy. The Democrats have said they don't want ballot candy on it. It came out of the Senate clean. It went to the House. It got a bunch of ballot candy put back on it. It's now back in the Senate. The Democrats are not going to let that go forward with ballot candy. So the Democrats are going to filibuster IP reform and hold up the budget. That's why they can't bring this up right now.
Roger off of the texter at 874-9390 wants to know if IP reform would retroactively neutralize the petitions that are currently in progress.
That's
That's a good question.
I think it would have to be.
Probably the courts will have to.
There's an ongoing debate about, and it depends on some of the initiatives. The governor gets to pick. And so would initiative petition reform go on the August ballot or the November ballot? Would some of these IPs that are circulating go on the August ballot and the November ballot? And we can't sit here and answer that.
Here we are talking about this, and look at this. We're getting dragged down into the mud. There's other things going on. CBS News reported yesterday that, in fact, the Biden administration is trying to do quick fly them in from Gaza, Palestinian refugee parole into these United States. That's flying under the radar. While the Columbia campus protests, they cleared the vermin students, those termite students, out of the Hamilton Hall. UCLA, the police are called in and doing their job. We're going to talk about all of these issues with our two guests. First of all, we'll be talking with Art Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies. This is a big deal, bringing in Palestinian The daily DC rundown.
$9,000 seems like the least of Trump's worries, but he did get fined yesterday. We finally got the order on the, the prosecutors had said, and I think initially they had said there were 10 violations. He must have only gotten 9 because it was $1,000 for each violation. The judge did say, hey, you could get jail time for this, so cut it out. Also, I guess the prosecution has already identified 4 additional violations, and I think we're expected to hear about that on Thursday. Randy's rolling his eyes.
And he has to take his Truth Social tweets down by 2:45 today.
They're not tweets. I think they're truths or something.
Whatever they are.
Yeah, his posts. He's got to take them down, but clearly he's not. He's still talking. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Also, today the Fed will conclude its meeting. There'll be a news conference today. We are expecting a lot of economic news this week. We also found out yesterday, or I guess this week, that it's pretty much a no-go on the Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion for Mike Johnson. Democrats have said they're going to save him, which is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I think. I was hopeful that it would come to this because I just don't think another turnover is what we need right now.
Chip Roy said he wasn't going to go along with her, and so I think they're realizing that kind of a militant approach when you have a weak hand, asking someone to win the world championship of poker is probably a toxic way to conduct yourself.
Yeah, and everyone's gonna call our bluff.
Yeah, right.
So we think that is now dead. Maybe they can actually move on to real issues. We've also, Randy, I want to get your opinion on this because big news out of the Fed yesterday with the DEA saying they are going to approve an opinion moving marijuana, reclassifying marijuana from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug. What kind of implications does that have for
I think
folks?
it probably is going to help alleviate a lot of heartburn within hospitals and other institutions so that they don't have to worry about, we're funded by federal money, and we're allowing people who have gummies or family members that bring gummies in that they got at the dispensary down the street, but yet we can't really allow it. And we struggled with that. Are we going to search people as we take their things out of their coat pocket and put it into a bag because they're having surgery? Oh no, we saw a gummy. Now what do we do? So I think it'll help reduce the conflict that a lot of people have when they're taking care of folks.
Now, I guess this proposal out of the DEA still has to be approved by the Office of Management and Budget, so it's not quite final. But then also, I think many have struggled, and one of the hangups with with this issue has been banking as well, because a lot of this cash flowing in, even at the state level, they have trouble with banks that are federally insured. I don't know how this would affect that, but I do know as far as the criminal statutes, it would take Congress to come in and change that. So although people are like, woo, free marijuana for everybody, there are still things in place that this will not affect.
And it's still a controlled substance, so I'm not sure how much it's really going to alleviate it. There is that clash between federal law and the reality of non-enforcement in the state laws. Hannah and Stephanie will be putting on their May Day dresses, and we'll all be dancing around the May pole, right? Because it's in many countries, this is the first day of spring, celebrates that. But also in other traditions, this is the International Workers' Day, separate from Labor Day. And it has some Marxist traditions. So I think I brought it up yesterday. We had a grand event at Country Club of Missouri, the Show Me Institute's Insider event. It was fabulous. Aaron Hedlund, of course, the chief economist there of the Show Me Institute, and Elias Chapelas, who does a lot on the state work, the state budget. Man, he delves into that line by line, goes into it. And he had a former role at the State Department of Economic Development and knows a lot about what's going on there. We're talking about an exciting thing that they're trying to get some interest in called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that they're working on getting some interest in. And so you'll be wanting to follow showmeinstitute.org. And as they roll out a lot of the blogs and the white papers and the information behind that, it's really to try to put a throttle on exploding state budget, you know? And to me, all I could think about is, I keep saying it, and on this May Day, we're all socialists now. Everyone has their special interest group, everyone pays their taxes, and then they want to clam some of it back. I want to claw some of it back by knocking on my legislator's door and getting my special interest group. I want to make sure nationally I get my Social Security and I get my Medicare, and I want to make sure if I'm a farmer that I get my subsidies. And if I'm a doctor, I want to get good rates for the CMS. Is there anything in it for the lawyers? Lawyers lobby? Anything there? No?
Probably not.
Well,
probably not.
Stephanie and I took a vote off air,
Yeah.
and we knew you were going to be playing that song. We had no idea what it was. This is the song that we have elected to use for our May Day.
For your
song.
May Day.
Yeah.
You see.
He says it's going to be me, but it sounds like he's saying
Oh, it's going to be May.
And so every May
I see. I like that.
people love to post like old school JT and do that. No, as far as the spending, I mean, let's, I thought about it, and I don't love spending more money, but I will say last weekend, and we're talking about the state budget, last weekend, driving to St. Louis, all backed up on I-70, and it was like there was a little, bumper issue with a trailer. Mm-hmm. Okay. The entire side of, headed to St. Louis is blocked because of this accident, right? Mm-hmm. But something had spilled out, and because the road's so narrow and because it's close together, whatever the stuff that had spilled had gone onto the other side of the highway.
Yep.
So we had all 4 lanes of I-70 blocked over like a little, fender bender.
Right.
And I just thought, oh, I'm so thankful we're doing the work on I-70 because it's going to...
Then we could add 6 lanes blocked.
No. I think it's really going to alleviate some of these issues. And I'm just...
No one's going to argue about that. I don't think it...
I mean, I think when people talk about... if we talk about spending, like that was one of the big items in the budget, right? So, the state spending has exploded, right? I mean, and some...
What is that, $800 million? What are they spending?
I don't know. It's a lot, though.
What are they spending, John? You remember?
I'd have to Google.
But, I mean, he made the point, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Dr. Hedlund made the point that we've gone from a budget of, in the 20s somewhere, $27 billion to $52 billion this year. I mean, that's ridiculous in a matter of, 5 years.
Oh,
and our budget has outpaced inflation plus population growth. So
$2.8 billion.
How much?
$2.8 billion with a B.
That doesn't explain going from 28. I mean, that should be a one-time expense over a few years. That's done.
It's a lot. And Show Me Institute does some really good work. I mean, I'm on their, I will disclose I'm on their advisory board. I think it's great. And I think Dr. Hedlund does really good work. And I think on the spending, and I think that's where you can really get ahead is they really break down, where these increases are. But I think if we look at it, even conservatives have supported or so-called conservatives over the last several years, things like the expansion of certain tax credit programs. A couple years ago, we voted on a film tax credit. I mean, there's...
Right.
I think everyone's pointing the finger.
Shame on them.
But be really careful because I think when you look at the votes, I think everyone's guilty.
You talking to me?
Right?
You talking to me? I don't want a tax credit. I want them to take the profits that are going to United Healthcare, Centene, Homestead, whoever they are, that has the Medicaid budget. Let people providing care, let Medicaid recipients take care of that. Do a pilot project. Get a block grant. They talked about that, how they would like to have flexibility to where the feds give block grants, and then the state can use creative methods to try to efficiently and effectively provide the services that the people want, right? Instead, we just keep playing by the same system where we keep paying more and more money. It's almost like we're captives. It's like Stockholm Syndrome. We're captives of a system that is we're hostages of a lunatic system that just says more money will fix the problem. No, you have a systemic problem. We're not a free market. He was talking about healthcare. It's no more a free market than the man in the moon.
Well, it sounds kind of like you're flipping your script from earlier this morning, Randy, because the only thing that filibuster is doing is preventing us from time to actually debate the budget. So if I put and so we would have a full 2 weeks to walk. Remember how Bill Eigel said, I'm going to walk line by line through the budget. We're going to really talk about these issues.
What he told us.
Guess what we're not talking about?
Right.
Guess what we won't have time to talk about?
Well, the other side of it was, too, when we talked to Probst's chair in the Senate, Lincoln Huff, and said, well, what about the some of the governor's recommendations that the House folks took out of the budget? And he said, well, there may be a chance that we may put some of that stuff back in, and then it goes on to conference, and this is the 1st of May, and they need to be done with the budget by the 10th.
I have the solution, gang. Sorry, and I love you people in Jefferson City. Oh, I love you all. You're wonderful folks. I would rather have you go back to your businesses and every other year you meet. Just meet every other year like they do in Texas.
I love the idea. Well, and some folks, is it Nebraska? Some folks have 1 year substantive issues. It might be Indiana. Maybe not. Anyway, and then they do the budget in the off year. And so you can't hang up the budget on account of IP reform or whatever else. And I agree, Randy, every other year, or I really like the split. You do budget 1 year, it makes it more difficult because then of course you would have to budget for 2 years. But I do think, I do think we should be talking about the budget.
Remember we talked last year with Cindy O'Loughlin when the things came down to the wire and then over a dispute over gambling here and I don't know, sports this and slot machines here. It is so confusing for the average Joe just trying to make a living and put some food on their family's table. And remember, she said there were promises made and not kept. And Eigel said there were promises made and not kept. I think what we have
That's
here,
politics.
That sucks. Excuse me. That is inexcusable.
But if you think that the politicians are telling the truth to your face and that all of the promises that
shame on them. I tell
in a major election year.
You don't lie to me. I don't lie to you because we're friends and we work together.
We're not politicians.
Well, excuse me. Shouldn't we expect our politicians to be honest with us?
But do you want to win? I mean, it's like a game of Survivor. Sometimes do you have to move? I mean,
really? Are you saying that, Stephanie Bell?
Look out,
I'm
Randy.
Saying,
she's going to vote you off the island.
I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying I don't have
You're making the observation.
I don't live in La La Land. So the fact someone
John
the fact that can you believe someone told me something and it wasn't true in the state capitol?
Hannah,
I'm not surprised by that.
Was I just accused of being La La Land? The only good part of that was, are you saying I may be something like Ryan Reynolds? No. I mean, what I'm saying, I live in a world where don't we all want one another to be truthful with one another?
Of course.
Well, what in the heck is going on that we can't expect truthfulness?
Nobody wants politicians to be untruthful.
Right. I'm just saying
but it's just not politically expedient at times.
It's all strategy,
Ladies
right?
and gentlemen,
they would tell you they're not being untruthful. They just, something changed. They reimagined their position. They, whatever. I'm sure they can swing.
That's okay if they came out and said that and were honest about it. That'd be fine. Why don't I get a text from someone right now that says, Randy, here's what's really going on behind the scenes, right?
Because they're all hard at work. And those the people that don't get the credit are the staffers. Because the senators get up and, chat and read books or whatever, but you've got someone there doing the journal. You've got the sergeant in arms and the door people there all night long. You've got the staffers there all night long. There's a lot of people in that building who are tired.
I think
I thought it was cool. Yeah. Senator Holly Rader, actually on her Instagram yesterday, did a really nice post just shouting out her chief of staff and talking about how the folks behind the scenes don't get enough credit. I thought that was really sweet.
That's right. The first thing we need to do is tell all of them to stop calling one another names. We need to stop calling people swamp creatures. And I mean, I joke about the swamp. It is a bit of a swamp. And
Yeah, leave that to us radio guys.
There is a bit of a stench in the swamp. But after you smell the stench for long enough, it doesn't smell like stench. It smells like perfume to you, right?
I kind of like it when they start calling. I mean, because if someone calls you,
it's entertaining.
It's good for us.
I mean, I feel like if someone calls me a name, like if we're debating, and then like, I mean, there was some gal on my Facebook and she was all mad, and she's like, "You're a liar," and I'm like, I just posted the language, so like point to where I'm lying,
right.
you know, and I think once they've devolved into calling you a name, like we can debate on the issues, and when you know you've lost, or when you don't have an intelligent thing to say back, then you start using names. So I kind of feel like it's like you've won, right? Like.
Yeah.
So like you and Nicki Minaj, right?
Right.
There's a difference between calling you a liar and saying you're a person who I respect, but you told something that isn't truthful. That's different. Love the sinner, hate the sin, right? There's a difference there. And I think that's why, from what I've talked to, the few insiders I've talked to they say they don't disagree with Bill Eigel and the Freedom Caucus's stance. They like it, but they've not created successful relationships. They haven't done relationship building, and maybe that's because that's what works, right? The headlines and you get a lot more coverage on this show and others when you say bombastic things about people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my frustration, and typically, you know, I don't disagree with many of the issues that the Freedom Caucus stands for, but like I said this morning, I think their behavior is going to force our other conservative members to negotiate with the Democrats and make concessions to get this thing moving. Right. And so we are going to end up in a more liberal place than we would have been had the Freedom Caucus sat down.
Now, I agree with you that we do live in a system where some degree of negotiation and concession is usually necessary, right? Because even if you do what the Democrats did, like with the nuclear option in reducing the supermajority, the majority for federal judges, those kind of strong power plays in the long run tend not to work out for you. I agree. Obamacare, you know, that was such a terrible thing.
There's always payback down the road.
But at the end of the day, all I know is this protester at the University of Washington is sometimes the way I feel. I mean, I'm not going to go down.
Man,
that was
wow.
She's holding a sign that says something about free Gaza or something. But I think a lot of us out here are going,
where's the guy that
world?
Just picks up the people by both arms and legs?
I'm going to ask my friend Cindy O'Loughlin why she won't bring that IP reform thing up and see if she's
gonna do that to you.
No, Cindy won't do that.
Oh my God.
to go end arounds against the law and at a minimum the intent of the law, and trying to stretch it so thin that you step out onto it and you'll fall through the thin ice that he's on. Now it's reported by CBS News that the administration is going to let Palestinian refugees basically just come on in under this crazy parole system that he's been letting Haitians and others come in. Just direct flights from wherever they are, come on over with a path to citizenship. Get your Obama phone.
Well, and we've started seeing more data about the existing flight program and where these folks are ending up and how many. It's crazy.
And it's going to come to a city near us. It's not a matter of if, it's when. I'm telling you, we're all border states now. And with crazy Columbia leadership the way they are, there'll be a sanctuary city sooner than you can say sanctuary city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone filed for that. Well, that's something new. Jay Ashcroft opened up the filing, by the way, for that senatorial seat where Weber's the only candidate now. But on the Republican side, Chuck Basie pulled out because of a health problem last week.
He withdrew, and
so
under
now,
the statute, the secretary opens up the filing period for
either
5
today
days.
or tomorrow, right? Today?
Yeah.
For 5 days. So, Stephanie, you want to run?
I am not running.
Okay, she's not running.
Officially.
All right, she's not running. Well,
thank goodness. That's a lot of paperwork for me.
and Mr. Bell concurs.
Right.
I continue to ask.
It's a tough district for any Republican. I mean, after redistricting, and that's just the truth.
It's going to be a bear.
So.
It's going to be a bear. So I continue to ask, did Black Lives Matter and what happened in the summer of 2020, where people essentially, there were only about 300 prosecutions nationwide. I mean, it was in the couple hundred. Nothing like the J6 prosecutions. Why? It depends who's doing the crime. It depends who's breaking in. It depends who's, causing civil unrest and disorder. If you're in one of the protected classes by the establishment, not so much. And apparently that now involves prosecutors and judges. I'm not sure. But you got to wonder why police. Well, it's not the police. I think the police officers, if they had their way, would have a tight, swift, certain punishment. Lock them up. No early parole. And they do it again, throw away the key. I think they would be more on that side of the fence, I think. But we have this namby-pamby, forgive you, you're just a dad, you grew up in a tough, your mom didn't have around a border that seemed to have, in the last week or two, sort of been subordinated. Well, last night, under the cover of late breaking news, CBS News reported that the administration is up to some nefarious things again with regard to stretching to the max some of what they say is their allowable immigration policy. Andrew Arthur with Center for Immigration Studies joins us now to unpack that. And Art, I saw that and I thought, is this another abuse of the mass parole system for Palestinian refugees just with a straight line into America? Welcome into the show.
Well, thanks so much, Doctor, and appreciate you having me. No, it's not quite that yet. Every year, the President of the United States sends a notice to Congress that tells Congress how many refugees we're going to accept each year. Trump administration generally accepts about 30,000. Biden has bumped that up to 125,000 per year, but hasn't quite met that. These folks in the CBS News article are Palestinians who would be brought into the United States as refugees. That's completely different than the parole program, but this is a unique proposal because we've never accepted, or we generally don't accept, Palestinians as refugees. There are plenty of places in the Middle East, Randy, where they can go. They can go to, Jordan, and millions do actually live in Jordan. They can, resettle elsewhere in the Middle East. There's no real reason to bring these folks to the United States, but I think that the Biden administration is offering this as a balm. Now, here's the thing that you need to be careful about. If the Biden administration moves forward with this, it may create yet another of the parole programs that you've described. We have them for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. We have them for Ukraine. We have them for Afghanistan. I could imagine the president getting squeezed in this election year and creating yet another parole program completely outside of the INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, to bring large numbers of Palestinians to the United States. And that's really what we need to watch for.
Yeah, well, what concerns me is what are the criteria for entrance among these refugees? I mean, it says certain Palestinian refugees is what they, glean from the documents. And later on, they say those who pass a series of eligibility, medical and security screenings would qualify to fly to the U.S. with refugees. I mean, what kind of bar how high is the bar for a, quote, security screening? I just get a feeling there's a very low bar in this setting so that he can go to Dearborn, Michigan and other places and say, look at what I'm doing for the Palestinians. And how do we know who we're getting here? I mean, Donald Trump keeps talking about how we tend to get, some of the folks from Venezuela and every other country that they don't want.
Yeah, no. And under this refugee program, those individuals are first screened by the United Nations. And after they're screened, the United Nations will, send the United States a list of people who have relatives here. They then get screened by refugee officers abroad, a part of the United States Refugee and Asylee Program, also known as USRAP. And, they determine whether those people can come in or not. But you make a critical point. The information that we have about those individuals is only as good as what we get out of the UN and whatever we can get out of the Palestinian Authority. And, of course, the Palestinian Authority in Gaza is run by Hamas. So, this is one of those situations in which the United States doesn't really have any information of its own about most of the people who are, currently in Gaza, any of these Palestinians who would be resettled. So we would be dependent upon, get ready for this, the goodwill of Hamas and of the United Nations to make those determinations. So I laugh because it hurts too much to cry.
Wow, it's amazing. Art Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies joins us. You had an interesting blog that you penned, I guess a paper that you penned, just out today on May Day, International Marxism Day. Maybe it's better to think of it as dancing around the maypole, celebrating Spring Day. About political prosecutions, the definition thereof, I guess, and the U.S. asylum law. How does that interconnect with what the Supreme Court was arguing last week and whether Trump should have immunity or not?
So, yeah, Randy, if you read through the transcript of the oral argument last week in Trump versus the United States, you could see, speaking of dancing, you can see the 9 justices of the Supreme Court dancing around in this instance, the elephant in the room, and that is allegations that are made by former President Donald Trump and a number of attorneys general, Republicans, who filed briefs with the Supreme Court, who argue that the prosecution going on in D.C., the Jack Smith one on January the 6th, is politically motivated. We have a history in this country generally of not prosecuting individuals who have previously held public office. Again, nobody's above the law, and I appreciate that. But the allegation that's made by the former president and many other individuals is that, not just this prosecution, but many of the other ones are politically motivated, that if he weren't named Donald Trump and he weren't the former president, he weren't the front runner for the GOP nomination and the presumptive nominee, that none of these prosecutions would be occurring. This is actually one of those things that we deal with a lot in immigration law, because we get a number of people who make asylum claims, and they assert the government of my home country attempted to prosecute me. They arrested me, and they subjected me to grilling, and then they prosecuted me. They tried to put me in jail for years because they don't like my political opinion, or they're biased against me because of my race or nationality or religion. So again, it's sort of interesting. I never thought that the day would come in the United States when I would use what I learned about assessing political motivations and prosecutions in the context of asylum cases, to analyze a prosecution in the United States, and certainly not one of a former president. Again, nobody's above the law, but every prosecutor, is keenly aware of the fact, and again, I don't want to get into the Trump case, but keenly aware of the fact that they have prosecutorial discretion. Everybody, Randy, you, me, everybody listening is guilty of some crime they may not realize. In fact, there was a book a number of years ago called 3 Felonies a Day that talks about how everybody in the United States has more or less committed 3 serious crimes a day. If a prosecutor is hired to go, find something that, the doctor did, they're going to find something. And, that's long been a criticism of the special prosecutor system, because they're basically just there to find dirt on one person. But there are standards that do guide our determinations in immigration court with respect to assessing, whether prosecutions are, politically motivated, or pretextual prosecutions, which is the term that we use in immigration law. And I think the Supreme Court would probably be well served by taking a look at some of those. Right.
Well, it was an interesting connection. And I think that I keep going back to that issue of, they keep saying that these are so-called asylum seekers that cross our southern border, once they're here and they contact Border Patrol, they have a legal right to claim asylum. And then I guess that's where you, as a former judge in this realm, immigration judge, had to adjudicate that. But one of the questions that continually floats to my mind in regard to the southern border is, what if we just put those containers with the razor wire at the southernmost edge of our border so that they never got in to make the claim in the first place, right? Wouldn't that be the prudent thing to do, Art?
Yeah, and you bring up a much bigger point than I think you do. I think you mean to. It's a great point. But every administration prior to this one has had deterrence as its primary focus and policy at the southwest border. We want to deter people from entering the United States. In fact, back in 2017, Congress passed a number of metrics to determine how well our deterrence system is working. Prosecution or detention is the biggest deterrence. If you can't live and work in the United States until your asylum claim is heard, if your asylum claim is weak, you're not going to come. Prosecution is another one. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago that talked about how prosecutions have plummeted under the Biden administration. Remain in Mexico, sending people back across the border, which is actually authorized by the Immigration Nationality Act, is another way. If people are coming to the United States not to get asylum so much as they are to take advantage of the asylum process, which a lot of these people are, and they'll admit it, then, that's an abuse. There is no deterrence, and that's why we have so many people coming. And in fact, Florida Judge Kent Wetherell, back in March of 2023, considering a case brought by the state of Florida about the release policy, the Biden administration said, there are undoubtedly geopolitical factors that play into why these folks are coming. But the main reason they're coming is because they know they're going to get released. There is no deterrence.
That's Art Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies. By the way, there's a web stream later today at 10 a.m. Eastern, so that's 9 a.m. CIS.org. You can find out about the Mayorkas impeachment, a panel discussion, I guess, and what's the impact of it. He joins us here on Wake Up Mid-Missouri. We only have a couple minutes, and I know, John, you have a question, so does Brian Hauswirth.
Yeah, we heard President Trump, before he ended up sitting in the courtroom when he was still on the campaign trail, Art, said he would get reelected and ban entry to anybody in the U.S. who does not believe in Israel's right to exist, and even revoke the visas of foreign students who are anti-Semitic. If he gets reelected, is that enforceable?
Yeah, and it's interesting because my colleague George Fishman, who's going to be on that panel today, has actually written extensively about this. I don't think that people truly appreciate the fact that when it comes to allowing people into the United States, the president and Congress have the ability to bar people who have interests and beliefs that are antithetical to the United States. Back in the 50s, we banned communists. To this day, we still ban people who support terrorist organizations. It's one of those things that the president has been given a lot of leeway about. It's one of those things that we need to use very carefully because, we don't want people who are going to come here who are going to, disrupt the United States. When it comes to the free exchange of ideals, that's absolutely crucial. And, it's going to be a fine line between those two things. But, yes, the president does have the authority to do that. It's not only in the Immigration and Nationality Act. You can go all the way back to the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1794, something like that, to, find the authority in the law. It still exists for the president to do that.
Hey, Art, you're doing we appreciate you coming on. Just a quick question. I don't know if you saw it for the listeners or you, but Fox News, a reporter actually had a live interview on air with, this is up at Columbia yesterday, with one of the protesters. And he said that there were janitors that were not being allowed to leave. And she disputed that. She said, I disagree with your narrative. And he said, no, these janitors told me that. And she said on air, get out of my face. I don't know if you saw that, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, now, of course, you're going to move me a little bit out of my immigration comfort zone. But, yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to confess. When I was in law school, I actually led a protest one time. One of my classmates was being expelled. And, we did it peacefully. We went to the front of Rice Hall at George Washington University. We presented a list of demands to the president. That student was actually reinstated, but we, complied with what the police said. We were very careful not to disrupt anybody. We wanted to make our point. When it comes to the First Amendment, of course, you have the First Amendment thrown around a lot. When you talk about private universities, it's a slightly different issue. But the Supreme Court has held that you can put time, place, and manner restrictions on First Amendment rights. I can't stand in the middle of Interstate 85 here in North Carolina and shut down the road. That's not proper. But I can certainly stand on a street corner and I can wave a sign. I can certainly go down to City Hall and I can, talk about the things that are wrong. I can hand out leaflets. Those are all permissible. And, I think that the biggest issue in all of this, and I certainly, there are definitely arguments to be made on both sides, but
I saw this on Twitter last night, and it involves the Arizona Diamondbacks. And they had a game delay last night for a little bit of a strange reason.
What happened?
Apparently, a swarm of bees formed behind home plate.
Wow.
In the netting that they use to protect the crowd from rogue foul balls.
Mm.
And they had to call in a beekeeper to come safely remove the bees. They carted the beekeeper in on one of the little gators that they drive around on the field with. And the beekeeper was eating it up, man. He was the hero of the game. They were cheering for him. He got his work done, safely removed the bees after over an hour and a half of game delay. And they were so appreciative that he got to throw out the first pitch once the game finally started. Folks are saying that the beekeeper should never have to pay for beer in the state of Arizona ever again. And I tend to agree with that statement.
This is the season when bees swarm. You know, when they're in a closed space and then they outgrow their space because of population growth, and then all of a sudden they head out. They get all tanked up with the honey that's left over, and then they take the queen, and 50-60% of the hive, they all just go. I've seen a swarm head out from one of my hives, in fact.
Sports Center had a highlight on that, and you could hear playing in the stadium Bonnie Tyler's holding out for a hero as the guy was sucking up the bees.
That is awesome. But talk about an unexpected hero.
Yeah, isn't that
there.
great? That's great. Yeah, so he ought to be just awarded for the rest of his days in some way, with maybe a little bleacher ticket or something for an open pass.
Oh yeah,
that's a big deal. I mean, sometimes when swarms, we've had an ongoing problem at the lair. The swarm, one of the swarms ended up in our chimney.
single filers, you're looking again, that's a pretty hefty sum. Now,
what scares me even more than this is some of the other stuff on the drawing board, particularly taxing unrealized gains and those kind of capital gains tax things. We've got some real dangerous stuff ahead.
President.
Okay, we're talking about something, again, that the Biden administration doesn't want you to read about. They don't want you to hear about this. If you're married with 2 kids and you're making $80,000 a year between the two of you, filing jointly, your taxes are going to go up, if Joe Biden has his way, almost $2,000. If you're making more than that, let's say you're each making $75,000, $80,000, you're going to go up $2,400. Now, that's on top of the $11,000 more that you're paying now than you paid when Joe Biden came into office. And did you hear that? In case you have stocks and investments, and many of you do, those unrealized gains, you don't even have to sell something, and you're going to be taxed on it. John, doesn't that sound mysteriously like a property tax? If you're owning a piece of stock, you got that stock certificate. Well, no one does that anymore. But just think about it. You got a stock certificate, and you bought Google stock 20 years ago. And now you've got it, it's in that safe, and it's gone from $20 when Google came out to $2,000 now. I don't know what Google is. If Joe Biden has his way, every year you're going to pay taxes even though you haven't sold that stock. You haven't realized any gain from that. This is utopia. This is dystopian. It's absolutely unbelievable. And most people don't know about this. Most people are thinking, well, these tax cuts that everyone received back in the Trump years are going to go on. They sunset, what is it, John? I think it's the end of 25, right?
25, yeah. Well, when Brad Jones from National Federation of Independent Business was on with us, he talked about some of those similar kind of tax cuts that affect small business, and those are all going away next year.
That's right. In those pass-through businesses,
exactly.
The LLCs and things. The other business provisions, and you might think, it's popular if you're an uneducated voter and you don't really think these things through, and sadly many people are, not you listening, but if you have a chance to talk to maybe your folks that you have influence of that don't pay attention, they listen to music stations, they listen to Taylor Swift and stuff. Oh, Hannah's giving Hannah's giving me the stink eye over there.
You can listen to Taylor Swift and be informed.
I know. I'm kidding you, Miss Hannah. Boy, did she bristle on that one. I knew that'd get her attention. Okay, so let's get those big companies. Let's increase the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. Last time I checked, the corporations aren't who pay the taxes ultimately. It's the consumers. Maybe it's people getting paid, and their wages won't rise as much because the company needs to divert more to taxation.
Maybe they'll lose their jobs because the company can't afford the bottom line and still pay the taxes.
Interesting you'd say that. The Tax Foundation at taxfoundation.org looked at the long-run economic effects of Biden's budget, which includes letting these tax cuts that occurred during the Trump administration to go through, and some other changes in tax policy. The GDP would be down 2.2%. Capital stock down 4%. Wage rate, so every one of you out there who want to get the man, tax the man, go after those evil corporations, wages would be down almost 2%. Full-time equivalent jobs, FTEs, down almost 800,000. Now, how's that working out for you?
Kind of a bummer.
Yeah, kind of. And, we've talked about how a lot of the job backfill that Joe Biden has taken credit for, he talks about a part-time job in the same breath and in the same manner as which he talks about a full-time job. They're jobs. So he's only telling a half-truth there. We spent a large part of the first hour talking about politicians, and I guess now it's just assumed, John, that they're going to not come clean with the truth. And I think that does apply to both sides. This is not a partisan comment, but they don't want to tell the rest of the story. Like, it sounds good to tax the man, tax the corporate guy, tax your boss, let's hurt the man. But that really is ultimately going to filter down to everyday people.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, right?
Yeah. And, and the other thing that the foundation found was that for all of us, should the Biden tax proposals go through, it would become even more complicated than it is to try to figure out what you owe. It becomes...
Oh, yeah, as if that's not hard enough.
I mean,
if the tax code isn't confusing enough right now.
I still think that is a load of you-know-what, that the government expects you to pay your taxes, but they're not going to tell you how much you should pay. Yeah. And then if you get the number wrong, you can be severely punished for that. But again, the government's not going to help you out and just say, hey, here's what you owe.
And you know what's worse about that, Hannah? I've known people. I think it happened to Mom and Dad once. They weren't notified because Dad had a small business running, music businesses and contracting for performances and so forth. And I mean, Mom and Dad, they put their stuff, they went to the accountant, did everything. And then 2 years later, there was it was a few $100 maybe initially. Difference in the tax burden, but they weren't notified about it till 2 years later. It was either 2 or 3 years later, and the penalty accrued during that time. Now that the penalty and interest, and I'm like, wait a minute, if I did something wrong, let me know in a timely way. And why does the penalty? I mean, maybe the IRS should just wait and notify us 5 years later, 10 years later. That we could solve the national debt that way, couldn't we? That's just not right. But if they owe you something, they've taxed you all year long. So from the beginning of the year, they've withheld money from your salary. They've earned interest on that. They've used that money that you couldn't use. And then when you get your refund back, is there interest on that?
No.
Not the last time I checked. Where's the fairness there? Barack Obama liked to say, I want to make sure everything's fair. Got to be fair. It's all about fairness. Well, that's not fair.
That's one of your better impressions. That was pretty good.
I don't know.
I wonder if it's strategic. It's probably not, but if I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on, for them to wait to notify you so then they can say, oh, and you owe late penalties. So they get more money out of it.
Let's be honest. I'm not for tax breaks for the rich. I'm not tax breaks for anyone. I just think, why can't we have a simplified, how much did you make? Okay, if you want to allow for a standard deduction, I could see 2 or 3 or 4 standard easily. How many children do you have? We're going to give you a deduction for this amount. I don't care whether you make 18 million or 8,000. You get keep it simple. Just keep it simple.
Biden's the guy who's been discussing. We've heard it on Fox News about the billionaire tax, wanting to charge 25% for households. We're up there in the rare air there. But I know the naysayers on it say, well, that's not an income tax, that's a wealth tax.
Man, and you're right. Now that you talk about that reminds me, they are in serious consideration of. What is it? The United Nations or the World Health Organization want to have some kind of a wealth tax to fund global health efforts. There's people at the international level that these globalists up in D.C. are talking about, and they're listening to this, and they might become a part of it.
Well, President had the deal. Well, what was the cutoff point for $500,000?
$400,000, he says. Yeah,
to fund Medicare.
Yeah,
and you'd be the ones to pick that up, and it would go up to like 5-6% tax on that one.
From the current, the more you make, the more your Medicare tax is, and he wants to go up to 5%. That's right. It's
5%.
Yeah, but I mean, look, you're gonna tax the people into misery and into demoralization, and if you're demoralized, I mean, people just get to where they don't want to work. I mean, you hear this.
Back to the 1031 tax, and that's the deal on, you have some real estate and you trade it for a like piece, and paying the taxes on is postponed down the road. And then he's talking about jacking up capital gains taxes again as well. So, boy, it all comes cycling home if this happens.
Well, and then they love to use this flowery language to fund needed investments as embodied in the Build Back Better America plan that we have. I mean, it is not the government's job to plunder your productivity or my productivity and then redistribute it in return for votes on the one hand or campaign contributions on the other. This is a very simple and very sadistic system that the politicians have now devised. In 1913, they realized after the passage of the income tax that, we can plunder what the people earn. We can take from them their private hard-earned equity in the name of wages and taxes and get into their bank accounts. It gives us a slush fund. And with that slush fund, we can give them a morsel here, give them a morsel here, if they just vote for us. And we can do favorable regulatory policy for the companies that, may just give a little bit more to our campaign coffers. That's how just corrupt our system has become. And unless we wrestle it back and demand that we go back to the constitutional limited government 18 enumerated powers principles, I don't see it turning around. And the scary thing, John, we've heard Aaron Hedlund say it, that very often these economic things, like I think it's Aaron that said this to us, that these economic cliffs, you don't realize you're heading towards a cliff, but this growing debt that needs to be serviced eats up anything that you can do to service existing entitlement programs and anything. And pretty soon, before you know it, all of a sudden, man, it's not a slow landing, a slow, soft glide path. You fall off a cliff economically.
Yeah, then I guess the average taxpayer out there won't have to worry about a small business guy on the corner, because you won't be able to afford his goods and he won't be in business anymore.
Listener Evan's got a good sense of humor on the texter 874-9390. He says, nothing like tax talk to get you nice and depressed for a good work day. Thanks.
There you go.
Well,
Evan says it needs to be talked about, though. Thanks.
Well, my job is to try to let you know that, it's easy to become complacent about these things. But for yourself, for your children, for your children's children, it's important to get back to some fiscal sanity, because I do fear we will be running into, probably we're seeing this. I mean, there will be the ultra rich that are beholden and own a few of the large consolidated companies in bed with the politicians, and then there'll be the rest of us. That's called socialism. And here on this May Day, I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So when you're listening to someone on the stump, it might behoove you to ask them what their thought is about more and more so-called investment. That's a bad, how many letter word? I hate when I hear government investment. Thank you, government. Don't take from the capital markets. Don't take from private markets, because government never, ever, ever invests it well. We know how to do that better. John, what's on your plate when we come back?
Whew.
Sounds like a potential of Bigfoot implications. together when Sanders believed he saw 3 Sasquatch near the river. So after strangling Knighton, who he thought had been acting suspiciously, Sanders told relatives he believed Knighton was trying to summon the Bigfoots so they could feast on him, and he killed Knighton in self-defense. Witnesses told cops that Sanders is a regular meth user, which presumably may ramp up his Bigfoot rhetoric. His defense was that having used meth heavily 3 or 4 days leading up to the murder, he was in a drug-induced psychosis. We've done some digging into the story. It turns out one of the Bigfoots was having sinus problems, but was still waiting on Amazon to deliver his Yeti pot. And what's the difference between the end of a Missouri Freedom Caucus filibuster in the Senate and Bigfoot? Well, this week there have actually been sightings of Bigfoot. And now you know the rest of that story.
No end in sight for our poor state senators.
That's right.
Should we check in with them to see if it's still going on, or is the filibuster?
I think we should.
We should probably check in with them, Hannah, if we can do that. We'll see if we can check in with them before this segment's out. And if not, we'll check in after the top of the hour. But
see if the senator is back there reading the begats and the begots out of the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
Here's what they're doing right now.
Have a lot of needs, and this says for young mothers ages 11 to 24.
Huh.
We talked about the next one. Greene County Health Department that's basically going to act like parents as teachers, add an additional thing to them. I'm wondering why we just don't put money into the parents as teachers program.
So I thought we were talking about initiative petition.
I have no idea.
Reference to 11-year-old mothers as well.
Yeah, just popping in and out. It's kind of hard to keep up with where they're at, but
well, they aren't debating IP reform, right? That's the problem. They're filibustering something else. Yeah.
Well, and I was not playing that at half speed. That is, they are definitely sounding tired.
Do they need to all be in the chamber when this is going on, or I wonder what the rules say about that.
If they call for a vote, they come running back down the hall, and they better have their coat and tie with them.
But as long as someone's up there speaking, then they're in session and nothing else happens, right?
They've got a hold of things.
In the break at the bottom of the hour, I was listening for a couple minutes, and they were doing roll call, and there was only one senator not there, if I understood correctly. So
I guess this just becomes a matter of who's going to blink first, right? I mean, that seems like this is a recurring nightmare that we have. It's these filibusters go on, and then I guess eventually if they either run out of vocal cord or maybe others run out of patience and then begin to move towards the filibusterer's way.
Well, I just think going on
at Heritage and author. So we're lucky to have him today. How you doing, Zack?
I'm doing okay, Randy. Thanks for having me on.
So I know that was a real kick in the pants, $9,000 fine for Donald Trump for 9 different violations of the gag order. What do you make of that? I mean, what really happened yesterday?
Yeah, look, Alvin Bragg and his prosecutorial team asked the judge essentially to impose the maximum fine on Donald Trump for allegedly violating this gag order. And of course, the judge did that. Now, what was really interesting is that under New York law, apparently $1,000 is the maximum fine statutorily that the judge can impose for violating the gag order. And so the judge hinted that other actions, such as possible jail time, might be appropriate for future violations of the gag order. And I think that would be certainly unprecedented. I think it would really escalate things to an entirely new degree if the judge were to try to put Donald Trump or any of his staff members or allies into jail for violating the gag order. Because as we've talked about before, Randy, gag orders generally are very disfavored under American law. We typically don't impose what we call prior restraints on people. We don't prohibit them from speaking. And yet in this case, that's exactly what this judge and this gag order are doing to Donald Trump, which is problematic when that's done to anyone, but it's particularly problematic when it's being done to Trump, who is a leading candidate to be the president of the United States.
Yeah, he did really have a not-so-veiled threat that if he continues and persists in what Judge Marsh, says is a violation of the gag order and speaking out against either, I think, known witnesses or even future witnesses. I think I saw something about that. How's Donald Trump supposed to know when the prosecution hasn't released their witness list? How's he supposed to know who a future witness is? I think I saw something there referenced. I mean, that seems to be really just over-aggressive from this judge. And at the same time, he said to take down the Truth Social post that he had. What would happen to people in the Trump orbit who would repost archive versions of that? I mean, they're okay, right? So the information could still be out there, what Donald Trump said, couldn't it? Or is Trump responsible to try to clean up everything that comes from his posts?
Well, you would think he would be okay, but certainly, I'm sure this judge would take a very broad view, a very expansive view of the gag order and Donald Trump's responsibilities under it. But look, you mentioned something that was interesting, Randy, about the witnesses, Donald Trump not being able to comment on witnesses or potential witnesses. Well, what's interesting about that is that some potential witnesses, like Michael Cohen, for example, his former lawyer turned state's witness in many of these cases, is attacking Donald Trump pretty regularly. And yet, under the terms of this gag order, Trump is essentially unilaterally disarmed from responding to many of those attacks, which is particularly problematic, again, in the context of a presidential campaign where you would have one party being able to put out whatever information they want, and yet Trump not being able to respond to it in anything close to real time. And that is an incredibly troubling state of affairs.
Yeah, there's several questions that arise from this whole issue of these gag orders. Maybe I've missed it, but is the proposed purpose behind the gag order that the judge put out to protect these witnesses so that if Trump theoretically, I guess the judge has to really be doing some Hollywood script writing here. Is he thinking that if Trump says something negative about witness A, witness B, Michael Cohen, whatever, that then it might put those people in danger? Or is it so that the jury, who I guess is not sequestered, right? They go home at night, and don't they go home? They're not right. Sequestered.
Right.
Is it to protect them from bias, from being influenced? What's the purpose of keeping him gagged while at the same time, as you said, Cohen's out there on some TikTok or some podcast? Doesn't he have a podcast? He's spewing all kinds of invective about Trump all the time.
Yeah, typically the purpose of a gag order is to protect those involved in the criminal justice process and to protect the integrity of the process itself. So as you mentioned, not to intimidate witnesses who might change their testimony in the face of pressure, not to influence the jurors or others involved in the process. And I suspect Both of those are, allegedly behind the rationale behind this gag order. But again, Randy, judges generally are very hesitant to impose gag orders. And if they do impose gag orders, they try to place them, make them as limited as possible and impose them for as unlimited amount of time as possible. And yet, as this trial looks like it's going to drag on, closer and closer and closer to the election, particularly as we lead up to the RNC and DNC conventions later this summer, the gag order becomes more and more and more problematic.
Well, and again, I haven't looked at, and I don't know if they're available. Do we know what the specific gag orders were? Like specific people he can't speak about? Because, for instance, wouldn't it be absolutely preposterous, absurd, unreasonable to not allow Donald Trump to say something about the judge's daughter, who clearly, her profile picture for a while, I think, was a Trump behind bars picture. Was that one of the gag orders? I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at those. Are those publicly available?
It should be publicly available, publicly entered on the docket there in the New York court system. But look, you're absolutely right, Randy. And, I've heard many commentators say that this judge should have recused given the actual or the appearance of a conflict of interest due not only to his past donations, but also due to the associations of his daughter as well. And so it goes back to, again, what we've talked about before, where even if Donald Trump is convicted by this jury there in Manhattan, I think there are very real appellate issues, legal issues that the Court of Appeals will have to sort out if that case goes up on appeal.
I just think that everyday Americans, those of us, here talking about it and listening, have to be thinking, if I'm locally, if you're involved in a civil matter or a criminal matter, even though your attorney may not like it, if someone else out there who is going to be or maybe has made a claim about you, filed a suit, a prosecutor said something about you, that someone is going to, and that person is out there making statements about you, and there's publicly available information about that person that is discrediting to them. I'm thinking of Michael Cohen. I now found it while we were talking. The gag order involves, many of them are on courthouse remarks on Michael Cohen. He called him a serial liar. Well, hasn't he been convicted of serially lying? So, common sense, I think, just is at odds with what this judge is doing in this case. Never mind the legal matters, but this judge is, I think he's disgracing himself, frankly, to prevent Donald Trump from speaking about publicly available information on Michael Cohen at a minimum. Don't you?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, I think actions like this are part of what undermines the confidence in the legal system that all of us should be able to enjoy. But I think in some perverse way, if you kind of take this step back from what's happening and just look at it through a practical political lens, in some perverse way, it may actually end up helping Donald Trump, because I think many people, even those who are not particularly sympathetic to Donald Trump or many of his policies, are looking at this and are very concerned about the lawfare and the politicization of our justice system, both at the federal and the state levels, that they're seeing in these trials.
Yeah, it just stinks to high heaven. I think people look at this, everyday people, and say, "Wow, if they can do it to Donald Trump, they can do with all the legal muscle he's able to muster. They could certainly come after me." I'm glad to say here in mid-Missouri, I understand all of our judges are really very good people who actually have a common sense head about them and do a great job. Zack Smith's with us here in Wake Up Mid-Missouri, a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and also author of a fabulous book on the rogue prosecutors and what jerks they can be, including Alvin Bragg. There's a chapter in there. Rogue prosecutors, how radical Soros lawyers are destroying America's communities.
Zack, talk to us. What was your takeaway on the strategy? We watched the gallery. We saw Eric Trump in the gallery yesterday, and David McIntosh from Club for Growth, and Carter Page. Wasn't she the staffer who got wiretapped by the FBI and all? The strategy of his team putting those folks in the gallery, I think it had a lot of effect, I'm sure, on the Trump base.
Well, look, Carter Page in particular, I think we're all familiar. He was, as you mentioned, wiretapped by the FBI. We know that a FBI lawyer essentially falsified, altered a document that served as the basis for a warrant application that was ultimately granted to essentially spy on Carter Page and his communications. And so I think in some ways it's highlighting the abuses that the federal government, the bureaucracy, committed in an attempt to stymie Donald Trump and his agenda. And I suspect once you think back and think about the Russia collusion hoax, once you think of the impeachments, all of these actions that were taken to essentially try to stop Trump and his agenda, I think it puts it in context that this is a continuation of those types of actions because, we've talked about it before. The case that Alvin Bragg is pursuing is, the facts are very thin, but more importantly, the legal theory itself is very novel. You have what are ordinarily misdemeanor bookkeeping charges, they bootstrapping into felony offenses based on a federal campaign finance violation that the federal government itself declined to pursue. And we consider that in light of the fact that Alvin Bragg campaigned not only on getting Donald Trump, essentially, but also on not prosecuting most other misdemeanors, most other low-level felonies. This makes this case stand out even more in the sense that he is devoting so many resources to prosecuting Donald Trump, when I think we all know that if the defendant's name was not Donald Trump, this case never would have been brought in the first place.
Zach, in the minute we have left, you have a grade and a little bit of analysis on how the administration and, for that matter, the law enforcement community in Columbia, UCLA, and other bastions of liberalism have done, as opposed to other places like University of Florida and other in managing the campus unrest.
Yeah, well, I think the administrators at Columbia, Northwestern, other places deserve an F. They're great for handling these protesters. Obviously, I think Ben Sasse and the University of Florida set the gold standard. They said Florida is not a daycare. Mm-hmm. They told the protesters what would happen if they violated the rules. They violated the rules, and so they were arrested. I think that deserves a gold star. Now, in terms of the law enforcement personnel, they've been put in incredibly difficult situations by the administrators in many of these places, and I think they deserve our thanks and our praise, as they usually do, for taking on very difficult tasks in very difficult circumstances.
Well, I know that the Columbia University people that broke into the building and were had to head out. And if you're heading out listening to us, thank you. As you head down to the Midwest March for Life, she'll be speaking a little bit later, so I'll cover this segment for her. And I wish I didn't have to tell you, the Dow tumbled 570 points yesterday.
Ouch.
The worst month since September was April. September 22, bond yields were up. It wasn't a good day. Why? Because some fresh news came out that the employment cost index, which is a measure of wages and benefits, added 1.2% in the first quarter. So if you're a wage earner, you go like, oh, yeah, that's looking good. Wait a minute, though. If you're a business person or if you're someone looking at the overall economy, you're like, oh, wait a minute. That means inflation is still being fueled with the labor inflation part of that equation, not just the supply and hard goods and commodities and energy costs of inflation. And so as that's up, the Fed Open Market Committee's meeting today. People in the market are saying, well, man, we were hoping that maybe there'd be a rate cut later this year. But with this kind of news and the Fed processing that most likely as, hey, we need to put the screws down in this economy more, keep those rates high, that's going to hurt people like Hannah who wants to buy a home, and the interest rates are going to hover at high levels. If you have credit card debt, it's going to keep that up there, which means you may not be spending as much, which means that may be a drag on the economy, which means if you're an investor in the market, maybe you're not as willing to invest. You see how this all trickles down to...
Yeah, one of those things, too. Yeah, the Journal did a story the other day about McDonald's and some other big brands worrying about their bottom line from low-income consumers and all, and they're trying to rebrand themselves as more upscale and all. Hey, the guy wants to go in there and order off what used to be the dollar menu, can't even afford to now. And what's that do to them and all the big fast food places?
No, you're so right. And John, I think that this is going to probably, as you said, the people that are still driving the spending, which is driving what growth we have in the economy. And we talked about how last week it was down, to 1.6, 1.8%, way below previous quarters in the first quarter this year. It turns out that there is this disparity. What's driving consumption is higher income earners. Well, isn't that going to create that old class envy? And boy, Bill Clinton started that whole train, and he made hay on that politically. And I got a feeling Joe Biden and the Democrats and the progressives and the Bernie Sanders are going to make something out of that too.
I think so.
Yep, the future.
Well, and the whole angle with the private payrolls adding under 200,000 for April, a lot less than they did
the other day, I think it was on the Dave Rubin report, was talking about, he asked her about VP, would she be VP ready? And because now, and she was all in. She said, whatever it takes, I would be honored to serve as vice president.
We're kind of a big deal.
So, we'll be talking to Tulsi for as long as we can talk with her. That'll probably be a truncated interview. She's very popular, and she's written a new book. And so we'll see what that is. For love of country, leave the Democrat Party behind is where she's coming from there. She was a rising star and then really felt as though she was just left out on the sidelines with some of her anti-war stances and some things that just weren't lockstep with a lot of the mainstream Democrats. And she left the party. You've seen her an awful lot on Fox News and, I know with Tucker when he was on Fox. But quite a resume, an Army Reserve officer.
Served in Iraq.
Yeah. Had a couple of deployments, didn't she, I think?
I think she did.
And elected to the Hawaii legislature at the age of 21. And she's more and more, she talks more and more libertarian when you hear her talk. So we'll have to see what she says tomorrow morning at right off the bat at 6:08. So, the modern communication forms, email, text, it's almost like learning a new language when you think about it. Wall Street Journal had an article the other day, the new most dreaded word at work. What do you think that is, Hannah?
I can't think of a single word, but I can think of a phrase of like, hey, we need to talk.
Ah, there you go. So the article says, Harrison Longtran's 3-letter missive strike fear into the hearts of his colleagues at the Lucky General's ad agency in New York. My mind goes to the worst places, says a colleague who works with him. There's no other information in the Slack instant message as she waits for the proverbial other shoe to drop. It's like, am I fired? Am I in trouble? Is your mom okay? The hey and wait instant message phenomenon comes in other iterations. Hi. Hi there. Hiya. Hey. Heyo.
So it's like when you just get that message and no other.
Yeah.
Okay. I can see that.
Or just when you first read that, think what flashes through your mind. Hey, it's usually going to be, it's not like, hey, it's beautiful out. Have a nice day. Right? There's usually a request behind that. Like, don't you think?
Yeah.
One of our former bosses would always text and just say, good morning. And you're like, oh, no. There's another text coming.
So just cut to the chase,
Yeah,
please.
we ran him off the state government. So
yeah, he's working in state government. As workers feel pressure to do more at a faster clip, employees and bosses expect quick answers from colleagues, even when they're not together.
Oh, boy, Stephanie Bell.
The dreaded. Yeah, the equivalent of the hey is when you get the question mark from Stephanie.
Or multiple question marks.
Yeah. And usually that's because you haven't been able to address a previous text asking something like, who's on at 8:10 on Thursday? Or is Hauswirth covering the traffic open house on I-70 later? And I don't always read text instantly. Every time I get a notification, I don't read it.
How dare you?
And when I don't, well, now I'm being trained. It's like a Pavlovian thing.
Oh, no.
Whenever I get it now, it wasn't Stephanie. I can address it later. But if it's Stephanie and I know I don't address it, I know in a matter of time I'm going to get the question mark. How you doing, Brian? There is something going on at I-70 today, right?
Yeah, there is. And the answer to your question, yes, I will. It's good to see you. Good to see Hannah and everyone, John as well. The I-70, and yes, I will be there. There are going to be two. I'll focus more about the one tomorrow about Kingdom City, so we'll worry about that one tomorrow. But for today, it is an open house style meeting. I'll kind of give you a very quick summary of what this is. It's open house style. That means there's no formal presentation. You can come at any time. Now, the press release says public hearing, but it's not really a public hearing. Anytime from 4 to 7, they will have representatives from Millstone Weber, Jacobs, which is the designer, Millstone Weber's the contractor, and MoDOT. Now, many of our listeners have had questions. One of the questions I've gotten the most, Randy, is about the Steak and Shake at 70 and 63. People are. I mean, that's what they're worried about. I know they're worried about other things, but that one has come up several times.
Like with life without a take-home sack is like the day without the sunshine.
Well, there's only one other one in Columbia, and of course
you
one
transplanted St. Louis guys.
Exactly. But people are worried about that. But I know they have other questions, so I'll try to find that out. But people can go, and that will be at the Boone Electric Cooperative today, their main headquarters right off of I-70, 4 to 7. And the last point I'd make, I was with the governor when he signed the bill in August. You might remember. In fact, Randy, I think I saw you out there. It was a hot day. It was on I-70, and then he went to sign the NIL bill. But I pointed out my story, not just Caleb Rowden and Cherie Tolson-Reich, but the 4 Democratic state representatives from Columbia, Democrats, stood behind the governor for him, and he signed it. So it is it's a very bipartisan issue. And by the way, these were all state dollars used for this. I've seen Jess Piper indicate thank Biden and stuff. What she's talking about a $90 million grant, but that came way after. This project was totally paid for by state dollars, and $2.8 billion. So that was a little controversy because they used a little GR money. But the bottom line, none of this came from federal money except at the very end, and that is a grant. They really didn't even absolutely have to have it, but it helps. Well, so $93 million to be exact.
I thought that there was a timeline that construction was going to start in this area, in mid-Missouri next year, right?
It starts this summer.
What do you mean? They're still drawing up the blueprints?
No.
Well, what's the open house for? To explain the plan.
The open house will be, so they're going to have immediate availability at 3:30. I'll go to that. The open house is for people to see it. The plan is to start this summer. I'll learn the date today. This summer, very soon. I'll learn the specific date today. They're not releasing it right now. It'll be very soon, and it will start between Columbia and Kingdom City. And John and I have both. Well, I'll tell you, the representative I've talked to the most about this is Jim Schulte over in New Bloomfield, and he has a lot of truckers in his district. Kingdom City, I know a lot of our listeners in Columbia think about I-70 and 63, but you could make the argument for Callaway County that interchange at 54 and 70 is just as big. I would argue maybe bigger for them. We'll learn details about that as well, but it'll be this summer. I expect very soon, but we'll learn that. And Jim Schulte has said on the record numerous times, MoDOT did confirm it after he told me this, it will take about 3 years to do this. So, folks, you're going to be stuck in some traffic. Be prepared for that. And Sam Graves has told me that he thinks because of some of this traffic, some people are going to go up to maybe Highway 36, or they could go to Jefferson City and go down to 50. We'll learn all the details today, but it will cause some angst because people are going to be stuck in traffic. But it's a huge deal and very bipartisan.
And I think when we talked to Senator Fitzwater, I believe, because we've asked various representatives and senators in the area about how are we going to, are there plans to manage some of the workarounds, and are we going to have different traffic control on the side routes? So people are going to have to work around this and take, southern or northern routes to get back onto 70, either east or west of where the construction's going on. And I think
it's a 20-mile stretch through mid-Missouri of I-70 right here in our neck of the woods.
So I don't know what can be done. I mean, the roads can only handle so much, but maybe they can make some accommodations, along the way. I don't know.
And I will ask that. It's a very good question. It was Taylor Burks that raised the question about when he was running for Congress. He later withdrew, but it's still a very important issue. He was talking about, Randy, you've experienced it, I've experienced it, I'm sure, the outer roads on I-70 between Columbia and Kingdom City. They literally will just run out.
Roads to nowhere.
I've never seen anything like it. And then you have to turn around. It's very confusing, and that can be very problematic if there is a wreck. But no, I'll try to find that out. I don't know that we're going to see a lot on the outer roads. I'll find out today. There's certainly not been anything mentioned about them, but
outer roads are one, but then there's the other more distant roads.
Yes,
the numbered roads, and it's even though it's a circuitous route, it may in the long run still, in certain circumstances, be quicker. Right,
Brian, I remembered very early on when this was all squared away and it was going to happen, that you reported the contractor said they will keep 2 lanes of I-70 open both directions during peak hours through mid-Missouri.
Yeah, and that was what they said, and I assume I'm going to try to confirm that that's still the case. But yes, but it still would cause there's no doubt, John, that when you have that kind of equipment, and I'm also going to try to find out about the manpower. Do they have the men and women to get this work done? Obviously, it sounds like they do. We've still got the Roachport Bridge. It's underway. Yeah. But even with, let's just say they keep the lanes open, if you've that, you're going to talk about just tons of equipment out there. People are going to have to slow down, and they're going to, it's just, I can see traffic. I can see traffic.
So since you may have some long waits in traffic, I'm looking at this story that the sale of alcohol-free beer went up 33% between 22 and 23. If you were caught drinking a Guinness 0.0, a Heineken 0.0, Athletic Brewing Company's Run Wild IPA, which is non-alcoholic, Budweiser Zero, if you have an open non-alcoholic beer in the car, are you okay? Are you immune from Mr. Highway Patrolman pulling you over?
That is,
I would think so.
I wouldn't see why not.
I would think so.
Not an alcoholic beverage.
Well,
so.
get you folks. You may want to stock up. I'm just saying you're going to have some long and frustrating waits, but.
Or just wait till you get home and have a real one.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you're coming from Kingdom City, there is really, I'm trying to remember the first gas station. I worry about with the traffic, people running out of gas, because they run on fumes. We know that. So folks, you're going to want to gas up. But you got probably 10 gas stations literally there in Kingdom City. Plenty of places to eat. But if you get caught and there is a line, you don't want to run out of gas there. You don't. So because I'm trying to think, I believe it's all the way to Lake of the Woods, the next gas station that I can recall. I've driven that quite a bit, and that's maybe get a tank of gas out of that. I don't know, but if you're stuck in traffic,
there's a long sort of a gas desert there, right?
There
Fuel
is,
desert
and
between,
you get past Kingdom City. There's
and what was the
one.
dollar amount? It was like I sticks in my mind just for that stretch of the project. It was like $400 million.
Yeah, I'm going, and I don't remember the exact. It was $2.8 billion to be exact for the whole thing. The whole thing. We're talking Wentzville to all the way to Blue Springs. John, that sounds right. I'll get the exact dollar amount today. And again, a lot of the stuff people want to know, we won't know until later. But and the governor made that very clear. The governor even told me when I talked to him there at the bill signing, he said people are going to be upset. He knew that. He said they're going to be upset because they're going to be stuck in traffic, but the benefit will be, and we're first one, but it'll get done first. The people from, let's say, Boonville to Columbia, by the way, on the other end, that'll be the last one done. You folks from let's say Blackwater, Boonville to Columbia, the last one done. So it's kind of an unusual direction they're going in. But
in Warren, the Wentzville to Warrenton stretch next after mid-Missouri.
Yes, and a lot of our listeners use that as well.
What happened to my Taylor Swift story? Because I was going to suggest that Hannah had texted me, maybe we should just have folks turn on, rather than getting frustrated, honking their horns, getting their blood pressure up, just listen to the Taylor Swift art,
Yeah, the Tortured Poets Department that came out a couple weeks ago.
The top 14 on the Billboard list now, or something crazy?
Yeah, a couple days. I think it was Monday. The news came out that all 14 of the top 100 songs currently were from the Tortured Poets Department.
And I know Hauswirth and Marsh listen to that on their way to the. Don't you listen on the way to the courthouse and station?
I don't, but I know probably our listeners do. I don't. But Hannah's right. Taylor Swift is extremely popular. Yeah. I would prefer Dean Martin. That's Amore. That is
when the Soprano. Opens up like a pizza pie, it's amore.
I think that's the cue to go to break. Yikes.
All right. I guess it is time to go to break.
trafficking after he allegedly threw methamphetamine over the fence at the Algoa Correctional Center east of Jefferson City.
Oops.
A guy named Lucas Robertson from the Springfield area is accused of throwing 2 packs of meth into the prison yard.
Ouch.
And the corrections officer said they found him sitting in the woods, dressed in cami, in hopes, presumably, they wouldn't see him, and said he had a nice bright blue backpack with him with more meth in it.
Well, maybe with the camo, he was getting ready to turkey hunt. I don't know.
Yeah,
Speaking
could
of
be. Just a little low tech, you know.
Speaking of jails and prison systems, there's a new documentary on Netflix, and they did a little experiment inside a county jail where they basically took the officer out of a unit to see how the prisoners would get along amongst themselves. It's pretty good. It's called Unlocked on Netflix.
Wow, maybe that's a pattern for